Today I will be reading C.J. Cherryh, Cuckoo's Egg. Chapter 1. He sat in a room, the sand of which was synthetic and shining with opal tints, fine and light beneath his bare feet. The windows held no city view, but a continuously rotating panorama of the Colruyt Plain. A lie. Traffic noise came through. His name was Dune. Duan? It was Dana Duan Shatoni no Luch, but Duan was enough for day to day. They called him other things, say, general, Mingi, lord, or something very like, Hatani, that was another thing. But Duan was enough now. There was only one. Shonunin, the world over, knew that, and knew him, and when the door chimed, and they came to bring the alien to him, those who carried it would not look him in the eyes, not alone for the scars that a Shonun could see, the pale smooth marks traced through the fur of half his face like the limbs of a lightning-blasted tree, the marks that twisted his right ear and left his mouth quirked in permanent irony, and one eye staring out of ruin. He was Duan of Shanoan. He reached out hands, one of which was marred, like his face, and took the closed carrier that they gave him, marking how their ears slanted back and how they turned their heads from him, his for horror. Not of what they saw. They were meds and had seen deformity. It was the force in him, like a great wind, like a great heat in their faces. But his hands were gentle when he took the carrier from them. They went away, appalled and forgetting courtesies. He waved the door shut and set the carrier on the table rise, opened it, and gathered the small bundled thing from it. Shonunen were naked when they were born, but downed in silver that quickly went to dapples, and last of all to gray body coat and black on limbs and ears and crest. Duan held the creature on its discarded wrapping, on his knees, and its downless skin was naked and pink as something lately skinned, except for a thatch of nondescript hair atop its skull. It waved soft limbs and helpless twitches. Its eyes were shut, in a face flat and not unlike a shonun. Between its legs an outsized organ of curious form, and various, they said, function. Its mouth worked restlessly, distorting the small face, and Duan touched it with the sensitive pads of his fingers, with the forefingers of his left hand, and the two of his maimed right, exploring the hot, smooth feel of the bandaged, patched belly, the chest, the limbs. With the merest tip of a claw, he drew down its soft lip to inspect its mouth. Nothing but toothless gums, for it was mammalian. With the claw he lifted the lid of a sleeping eye. He saw it white and milky, centered with blue, restless in its natural shiftings. He touched the convolutions of the stiff, small ears, explored the visible organ, and discovered reaction. So it was sensitive. That was of interest. He examined the fat, clawless feet, all one pad as far as the toes, unfurled a 5-fingered hand with the careful touch of a single clawed finger, and the tiny fist clenched again, stubbornly. It waved its limb, fluid shot from the organ, and fouled Duan's clothes. Any shonen would have flinched seeing that, but Duan gathered up the wrap about the infant and mopped at himself patiently with infinite patience. So, likewise, Shonun infants performed such obscenities, if more discreetly. It let out cries, soft and weak and meaningless, as all infant cries. It struggled with less strength than his own infants had shown. He knew what it would be. Groan. He knew its face. He knew every aspect of its body. He gathered it against his breast in the stinking blanket and rose, went to the package they had brought him that morning, and left on the riser by the bed. He held the softly crying creature in the crook of his left arm, for he was still more able with the right hand, two-fingered as it was. He managed to open the case and to warm the milk. Not milk of shonunen. By synthesis, the meds provided of their own ingenuity. There was data which had come days ago. He had memorized it. The creature wailed, so shonunen wailed, exercising infant lungs, and it breathed the air shonunen breathed, and perhaps its gut would take the meat shonunen ate one day. The meds thought that this was the case. The teeth that would grow would some of them be pointed like the major teeth of a shonun. Hush, hush, he told it, joggling it against his chest. He drew the warmed bottle from its case, and thrust the nipple into the soft mouth that quested among the blankets. It suckled noisily, unquieted, and he crossed the sand to the riser he had left, sat down cross-legged, rocking it, whispering it. To it. Be still. Be still. Its eyes closed in contentment. It slept again. Fed and held, it could not, like a shonun, be taken for granted. He was delicate with it. He laid it finally in the bowl of his own bed, and sat beside it, watching its small movements, the regular heaving of its tiny round belly, and when the view in the windows changed and became the night-bound sea, he still watched. He would not soon tire of watching. He did not bathe. He was fastidious, but he inhaled the smell of it and the soiled blanket, the smells of its food and its person, and did not flinch, having schooled himself against disgust. They were dismayed when they came, the meds, to deal with him, to examine the infant, and to take it back to the facility down the hall, to weigh it and monitor its condition. He stalked after them as they carried it in its closed case. He offended their nostrils with his stink. And never once in all this dealing would they meet his eyes, preferring even the face of the alien to the chance of looking up into the stark cold stare he gave to them in all their business. They weighed the infant. They listened to its breathing and its heart. They asked quietly, never glancing quite at him, whether there had been difficulty. Duan Hatani, you might rest, the chief of medicine said the second day that they came for the infant. This is all routine. There's no need. You might take the chance to... No. Duan said. No. There was uncomfortable silence. For days Duan had looked at them without answer. Now the chief cast a searching, worried glance full into his eyes, and immediately afterward found something else to occupy herself. Duan smiled for the first time in those days, and it was a smile to match the stare. You dismay them, Duan, the division chief said. Duan walked away from the desk on which Alud sat, gazed at the false windows which showed snowfall. Ice formed on the branches of a tree above a hot spring. The sun danced in jeweled branches, and the steam rose and curled. Duan looked back again, the thumb of his maimed hand hooked behind him to that of the whole one, and he discovered another man who preferred to study something just a little behind his shoulder. The false sunlight, it might be. Anything would have served. It's in very good health, Duan said. Duan, the staff does its job. Never once had the eyes focused on him quite. Duan drew a deep breath. I want Shion. Duan, Shion belongs to Duan, doesn't it? I tell you that it does. Security at Shion. I stink. I smell. Notice it, Ilud? Long pause. The estate, you offered me anything. Wasn't that what you said? Any cooperation? Would any shonun in the world prevent me anything? If I want a woman, if I want a man, if I want money, or your next of kin, Alud, if I want the president turned out naked and the treasury to walk in, your Hatani, you wouldn't. Duan looked again at the false spring bubbling up in its wintry vapors. Gods, but you do trust me. Your Hatani. He looked back with the first clear-eyed stare he had used in years, but not even that could hold Alud's gaze to his. I'm begging you, Alud. Do I have to beg? Give me Shion. Settlers have moved there. Their title's valid by now. Move them out. I want the house, the hills, privacy. Come on, Alud. You want me to camp in your office? Alud did not. They had been friends once. Now Duan saw the guarded lowering of the ears like shame. Like a man taking a chance he wanted, badly at any cost. They call them men. You'll get it, Alud said, never looking at him. Alud's claws extended slightly, raked papers aside as he looked distractedly at the desk about him. I'll do something. I'll see to it. Thanks. That got the eyes up. A wounded look. Appalled like the rest. The agony of friendship. Of wounded loyalties. Give it up, Alud asked against self-interest, against all interests. The loyalty jolted, belated as it was. No. For a moment then, eye to eye, no flinching from either side. He remembered Alud under fire, a calm, cool man, but the gaze finally shifted and something broke. The last thing. Duan walked out, freer, because there was nothing left, not even Alud, just pain. And he wrapped that solitude about him, finding it appropriate. He came to Xion's hills in the morning. In a true morning, with the sun coming up rose and gold over the ridge, and the wind that blew at him on this grassy flat was the wind of his childhood, whipping at his cloak, at the grey cloak of the Hatani, which he wrapped about him and the infant. Alud's age showed distress, there on the dusty road that led toward the hills in the momentary stillness of the craft which had brought them there, over in the meadow. The aide's ears lay flat in the wind, which blew his neatly trimmed crest and disarranged the careful folds of his kilt. The wind was cold for a city dweller, for a soft hands like him. It's all right, Duan said. I told you there's no way up but this. You don't have to wait here. The aide turned his face slightly toward the country folk who gathered out of the range of hearing, who gathered in knots, families together uncaring of the cold. The aide looked back again, walked toward the gathered crowd waving his arms. Go away, the Mingi has no need of you. Fools, he said, then turning back, for they gave only a little ground, he stooped and gathered up from the roadside the little baggage there was, slung the sack from his shoulder. His ears still lay back in distress. Hatani, I will walk up with you myself. It was a wonder. The aide met his eyes with staunch frankness. Alud chose such young folk, still knowing the best, the most honest. Duan felt for a moment as if the sun had shone on him full, or perhaps it was the smell of true wind, with the grass scent and the cleanness. He felt a motion of his heart toward this young man, and it ached. But he grinned, old soldier that he was, and glanced at the uphill road, for this time he was the one to flinch from the youth's innocence and worship. Give me the sack, he said, and stripped the carry strap from the young man's shoulder and took it to his own, his right. The infant occupied his left, warm and moving there, nuzzling worm-like amongst his swaddlings beneath his cloak. But Hatani, you're not going, I don't need you. He walked away. Hatani! He did not look back, did not look at the mountain folk who lined the road near the copter. Some of them were displaced, he was sure. Some of them he had shelled Xion. Some of them had held Xion, having gotten it since he was renunciate. Now they were abruptly dispossessed. He felt their eyes, heard their whispers. Nothing definite. Hatani, he heard, and alien. Whisper they need not. He felt their eyes trying to penetrate his cloak. They came to wonder what he was as much as they wondered about what he brought. Hatani. There was respect in that. What happened to his face? A child asked. Hush, an adult said, and there was a sudden embarrassed hush. It was a child. It had not learned what scars were. It was only honesty. Duan did not look at them, did not care. He was Hatani, renunciate. His weapons were at his side beneath the cloak. He asked one thing of the world. These hills, this place, a little peace. That a Hatani dispossessed them. The country folk living at Xion had surely thought their little title secure. The land was fallow, the house vacant, 10 years renunciate, and it was theirs by law. But it was what he had told Alud. There was nothing he could not ask and obtain, nothing in the world. He felt their eyes. Perhaps they expected him to speak. Perhaps they expected him to care, to offer words to reassure them. But he only walked past them up the road. the dusty road to the heights, and the house made of native stone, deep within the hills. He heard the copter lift. It beat away with small thumps like heartbeats echoing off the mountainside. It had come and gone often here yestereve and 3 days before, with other craft, seeing to provisions, to special equipment, to all such things as satisfied Alud and Alud's ilk. Nuisance, all of it. Long chapter. He prepared himself. He knew that Shion would have changed. He gathered up his resolve in this as in other things. He needed virtue. He sought it in abnegation. He sought it in lack of caring when he came in full moon to the mountain heights and discovered the things countryfolk had done to Shion, which he expected. A sprawl of new rubble-stone buildings, which destroyed the beauty of Shion, had once been a creation of smooth artistry indistinguishable from the living rock of the mountain wall that flanked it. The house sprawled now artless and utilitarian, the yard about it cleared and dusty. He was not dismayed. Only when he came inside and discovered what Alud and his crews had done, that afflicted him. Instead of the country untidiness he had expected, indifferent from the time of his childhood, of stones carefully polished, of spacious halls, and a sand garden where the wind made patterns, the government had worked sterility, lacquered the stone walls, sanded the floors in white, not red, installed a new kitchen, new furnishings, all at great expense, and the smell of it was new and pungent with fixatives and paint and new-baked sand. He stood there, in this clean, sterile, unremembered place, with its abundant stores, its furniture new from the city. For the infant, of course, for the infant. The meds feared for its health. They wanted sanitation, and destroyed. Destroyed. He stood there a long, long time in pain. The infant squirmed and began to cry, and he was very careful with it in his anger, as careful as he had ever been. He searched the cabinets for new cloths, found the cradle prepared. Frowned? The infant soiled itself. He knew the cry, smelled the stink, which had surrounded him, stronger than the lacquer and dry dust smell of sand. He laid it down on the sand. He put off his cloak and laid his weapons down on a riser near the fireplace. He listened to it scream. It had grown. The voice was louder, hoarser, the face screwed up in rage. He took cloths and wet them and knelt and cleaned its filth in starkest patience. He heated the formula and fed it till it slept. He walked aimless in the halls afterward, smelling the stink it had left on him, and the stink of new plaster, new lacquer, new furniture. He had run barefoot in these halls, laughed, played pranks with a dozen sibs and cousins, rolled on the floor sand till exasperated elders flung them out into a yard well shaded with old trees. The trees were gone. The new wing stood where the oldest tree had been. So much for homecomings. He made a fire. There was that one thing left untouched, the old stones of the hearth he had sat by as a child, and there were scraps of demolished outbuildings and fences in a towering pile near the rocks. He made a fire of them, burning others' memories of home. He took the infant outside with him, well wrapped against the cold. He took it about the house with him, in the kitchen, at last before the firewood cells. He sat on the clean, deep sand before the hearthstones, and held the infant in his lap. He had grown accustomed to it. The flat, round face no longer disturbed him. The smell was his smell, compounded of its sweat and his. Demon eyes looked up at him. The face made grimaces, meaningless to both of them in the wavering firelight, the leaping flames. He took its skull between his hands, the hole in the maimed, and he was careful as if the skull had been eggshell instead of bone. He smiled, drawing back his lips from his teeth, and gazed into its eyes, which perhaps saw him, perhaps not. "Winaya," he sang to it. "Winame," in a hoarse male voice unapt for lullabies. Little bird, little fish. The house had heard that song before. Hesalane. Do not go. The wind is cold, the water dark, but here is warm. Winaya, winame. And Shachea, he sang, but softly like the lullaby, which was a Hattani song. It was the death song. He sang it like the lullaby. He smiled, grinned into its face. "Thou art Hadas," he said to the awful demon face, to the slitted eyes with their centers like storm cloud. It was the Sadoth he spoke, the language of his hill-dwelling ancestors. Thou art Horus. Thorn is your name. It gazed solemnly up at him, unafraid. It waved its hands. He, Duan, reminded himself, he, Haras, Thorn. The wind howled about the house, skirled in the chimney, and set the flames to flickering in the hearth. He grinned and rocked the child, and did a thing which would have chilled the blood of any of the country folk, who doubtless huddled together in their dispossession, or the meds, or elude in his fine city apartment. He held it as if it were a shonen child, and washed its eyes with his tongue. They tasted salt and musty. There was nothing he spared himself, no last repugnance. No last repugnance he did not overcome. Such was his patience.